parents or your teachers too. Can't trust the government, just look at what they do. Can't trust the media, they're all full of lies. Once you know a little bit, all hope in you dies. Live free or die. Live free or die. Live free or die. Live free or die.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another exciting edition of Hardfire TV. My name is Cameron Weber, and I'm the producer and director of Hardfire for about the last 7 years, and we've made about 75 Hardfire programs. Today, we're going to talk about immigration and American democracy. Again, immigration and American democracy. Our second time talking about this, the three of us, Noel Wiggins, who we spoke about with the first time, isn't able to make it this time, so we're going to continue on without him. In our last show together, we had a discussion called Ukraine, Weapons or Immigration, where the idea was that we would pay the Russian soldiers to lay down their weapons and then offer them immigration into the United States. And we decided that that would be cheaper than giving taxpayer-funded weapons to the Ukrainian government. So we pay so then we said, okay, and how do we know that these Russian soldiers really are Russian soldiers and really were fighting? And then we got into immigration into the United States and who should be allowed for immigration. Should there be some type of requirement? Well, anyway, we were talking about that alternative, paying Russian soldiers to lay down their weapons, as our current solution only perpetuates the military-industrial complex. During this discussion, we kept getting back to the issue of immigration policy and how this relates to American democracy. This is what we're going to talk about today. Today on the show, I have the longest-serving Hardfire participant, Gary Marshall. Welcome back.
Nice to be back. Thank you. Thank you, Cameron.
For participating again. Gary's big thing, and he contacted us a number of years ago, is that we should fund government through debt and not through taxes. So one of our most popular Hardfire show was Government Without Taxes, ? So that's a whole nother topic. And then thank you, Gary. And then we have Marcy. Barry, welcome back.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Marcy has been discussing what we've been calling problems of the city together. Marcy used to live in San Francisco and was involved in the Libertarian Party in San Francisco. I live in New York City. I live in Brooklyn. And we've been discussing homelessness and violence and mental health and immigration. So thank you. I look forward to the discussion. Our discussion last time assumed we had a working immigration system, that we could identify if the potential immigrant was really a Russian soldier fighting in the Ukraine. We then shifted to the question, do we really want ex-enemy combatants immigrating to the United States? Then we started to discuss whether there should be a policy determining what type of immigrant do we want in the United States. First, I would like to help answer the question of whether we have a working immigration system. And I'll show a graphic here. Here's my personal take on whether we have a working immigration system. And this is in June 2022, at least 50 people died in a truck outside of San Antonio in Texas, about 150 miles from the Rio Grande Valley, where we go sometimes. So this was pretty close to home. It hasn't been tried in court yet, as far as I know, but an assumption is that this was part of a migrant smuggling operation. This type of senseless death shows that, yes, our immigration system is broken. Right? So with this in mind, my question is, why is the immigration system broken? I want to get to the root causes from south of the border. I believe it has a lot to do with the international war on drugs and the cartel and state violence that this conditions in Mexico and Central America. So Gary and Marcy, do you agree that drug prohibition and super profits this brings to gangsters might be one of the reasons that our immigration system is broken? Wait, what might be some of the other reasons? Let's assume we have a broken immigration system. Why? Thank you.
Well, it's broken for a number of reasons. I think I mean, you can go back a number of years in the U.S. Where they started to open up the border and bring in large numbers of now I tried to draw a distinction between immigrants and asylum seekers. To me, they're two different groups here. Immigrants are people who come lawfully. They go through a process in order to gain entry into the country. What you're seeing on the southern border is not immigration. It's basically large masses of people that are moving up. They've been told that they can gain access to the United States, and they're moving en masse up to the thing. It's a lawless endeavor. There's no laws that are being enforced. They're just bringing in people, giving them cards or papers, and sending them wherever they wish to go.
Funneled through not-for-profit organizations, but using taxpayer money for that, giving cards and benefits and transportation. And
oh, it's big business. It's big business for a lot of these organizations. In fact,
but how much does that do to the drug war? Or Marcy, were you going to say something? I mean, I think it has a lot to do with the gang violence due to the international war on drugs. Otherwise, we wouldn't have these things.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt Gary. I agree with Gary that there is a problem with law enforcement. I think the system itself, if by system you mean the laws are fine. I mean, the laws very clearly say who can come, who cannot, and clearly says that undocumented people are not allowed in. So it's not so much the system, but as Gary mentioned, there is a lack of enforcement of those systems. Now, for the drug, of course, the drug cartels, the huge profits, of course, they make a big difference. However, again, is it not a matter of enforcement in the sense that if you're wishy-washy about who can come and who can't, then of course people are going to try. If they knew that they couldn't, they
Yeah,
wouldn't.
let's get back to that point about asylum and right. So
Asylum, okay.
yeah, the laws are in place, but they're not being implemented.
Mm-hmm.
And then so that's the system is broken. I would say. But
I'm sorry, are you conflating, just to clarify, are you conflating asylum with these people that are coming in?
no, I'm not. What I wanted to do was
Okay.
get back to the political rhetoric of going to the root causes, right?
Yeah,
Instead of
exactly.
enforcing the law, quote unquote, or enforcing the law, which seems to me awfully complicated. The root problems for me is the international war on drugs. Without having that violence, people are not going to be running away from home as they are. So I think that's one of the root causes that hasn't been addressed. But you may or may not agree with that it's such a big cause is what I think it is.
well, there is a drug issue, certainly, but I mean, if there weren't a drug issue, then there would be just a group, the same people that would be exploiting all these people these masses moving towards the border for money and bringing them across. I mean, it's also a drug issue, but it's also people taking money to move people across state and international borders. So
Conspiracy theorists say that this is a way to get votes. So you bring people in and you take care of them cradle to grave through the welfare state, and then they'll vote for you.
Well, that's obvious.
Is that really what's going on?
Well, it's been working up here for up in Canada for decades. I mean, it's the same.
Same
They've
thing.
turned to the block voters. They've basically disowned the poor people, the people that are struggling in this nation, and they're bringing in these large numbers of people into Canada who refugees. They had the Syrian refugees, and now they'll just bring anybody. There's also a big issue up here with healthcare. We have a public healthcare system, so we have a large numbers of people that are coming into a system that's already broken. As far as I'm concerned, public healthcare is just it's a very poor substitute for a free enterprise system, and it's strained the system, and now it's basically breaking down with all the COVID and vax mandates. So
Yeah, central planning is shown historically not to be able to work. I don't know why we keep trying it.
oh, they will. They will. A lot of special interests. They're very much in favor of such a system. They do not like markets. They don't like free markets, and they will.
It's good to get things sole sourced on contracts that can't be audited under national emergencies. But on to our asylum and immigration, one of the points I wanted to discuss that only around, so we're saying that the people on the southern borders are asylum seekers on a majority of the cases. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I would say so. I think that,
No,
but the signal has gone out.
Yeah,
They'll take anybody and everyone. So
I
you're getting
disagree
very
with
few
that.
immigrants and large numbers of asylum seekers.
Marcy, maybe you know more.
I'm sorry. Yeah. I get so excited over these things, so I don't mean to interrupt. It would seem to me that when we talk about asylum, we're talking a very, very specific thing that is in the books, meaning people, groups, specific groups that are delineated as very specifically religion, social class, so forth and so on, that are persecuted. These people are not persecuted. They're not asylum seekers. So my question is, why are we calling them that?
Isn't there some who are being persecuted politically, who are seeking asylum? Or
No, they're running away to get a better. And see, it has been established by law that economic reasons for fleeing a country does not constitute asylum.
how about running from gang?
Or neither is violence that everyone is experiencing. If everybody in here in North Carolina is experiencing violence, that's not asylum. That's simply, well, deal with it.
Yeah.
I agree. They've just taken the word asylum and they're
Yeah.
using it to apply to just about anybody. And of course, nobody's getting a hearing at the border. They're being given papers, and then they are supposed to turn up for a hearing later, of which I'm sure few will ever do so.
This I keep going back to this point. So you're right. I don't think either of us are Democrat or Republicans or have a party line, a partisan line, but I follow the debate, and you have the Republicans versus the Democrats, and the Republicans are saying it's wrong to allow people to remain in the United States while you're adjudicating asylum.
Right. That's enough.
So that's a clear and obvious law that's not being enforced, which is people who are seeking asylum should not be allowed to remain in the United States. And that's not being enforced. And it turns out that only 15% of those who do apply for political asylum actually are granted that access. So 85% aren't granted asylum, yet they're still allowed to remain in the United States. Well, we'll get back to whether immigration is a good thing or a bad thing and what type of immigrant do we want. But so am I right that that is one law that's not being enforced that should be, which is asylum seekers should remain wherever they are?
But isn't the law for asylum seekers that they must be either in the United States or in a port of entry? That's the law. So if they are in a port of entry, yeah, they could stay where they are. Mm-hmm. But if they're here already, what you going to do with them?
Don't send them back is what you're saying.
Well, no, the law says you can't. I
Oh,
mean, the law says once you apply for asylum, and you must apply either while you're here. You can't apply where you're in Nicaragua and you apply. No, you can't do that. My thing would be use some of the taxpayer money to make a big warehouse where you put everybody there. Humane but not costly.
Well, they used to do, I mean, that was generally how it was done. They would
I think
take
so.
refugee camps. They had refugee camps set up outside. I mean, these were outside the United States in the Middle East, for example, and they would protect those areas. They were subject to all sorts of protection, no-fly zones, and so on. And then I guess the people that they thought that would be, fitted for a life in North America, in Canada, the US, they would take a certain select group of them and give them. They would gain immigration into the country.
that's
Their green cards and
Yeah.
their
the asylum issue. The asylum issue then is I am wrong in assuming that the law is not being enforced, because Marcy tells us that if the asylum seeker is in the United States, they're able to remain in the United States. And
Yeah,
you're
in the sense that,
under what state?
in my opinion, correct me if I'm wrong, in my opinion, that is the case. In other words, I am sure that you must be either in the United States or in a port of entry.
Yeah.
And I'm not exactly totally 90% sure that you can't send them back, but I'm pretty sure you can't. So
Well,
I
I
think
think
we
they
should.
ruled on that recently
They
about
did. Tell me about it.
moving people back across the border to into Mexico,
Yeah.
because that's where they came from. They weren't, you see, this is where they're not being persecuted in Mexico, but yet they came from Mexico. And we get this in Canada, where people come from the United States and they weren't persecuted in the United States, but they're claiming refugee status in Canada, but they came from the United States. So the issue was is not really, it's a very confusing issue, and
Right.
basically the laws have gone out the door. You've got activist judges who don't even follow the laws anymore. They create their own, and DACA and so on. It's become a real mess, and I really don't. I don't know what the solution is going to be. The best thing to do is to maybe go back and look at their countries. I mean, you're looking at millions of people that would love, tens of millions, hundreds of millions that would love to come to North America, to the United States.
Gary, that's a perfect segue. We've got 10 minutes left. And so now we were just talking about immigration, and now we're going to segue into the democracy part of the immigration picture. So now the democracy part of the title. The word democracy is like the word liberal. It means many different things to many different people. Originally, democracy in Athens meant only those who owned real property. For example, land had a right to vote. This meant that determining the role of the state in the democracy prioritized private property rather than state distributed property. This democratic ideal led to great economic growth and innovation. For example, today even homeless people have smartphones and apps. Most people aren't working 12 hours a day, and most children are healthy enough to grow into adults. Then, and this is where it gets interesting, then when you open voting to those who don't own property, there is an incentive for those who don't own property to want to take the property of those that do have property. The focus of democracy now becomes redistributing wealth instead of creating wealth. This brings in an endless cycle of government intervention and redistribution within the United States, the two-party duopoly, taking property in the form of taxes to give to special interest groups for folks. Back to Marcy's point that there might be standards for those who are able to immigrate into the United States, should there be a wealth standard for immigration to the US? And if so, should there be a wealth standard for US elections?
Well, I think that when the founding fathers were talking about the vote, they were talking about white men that had property. And,
And
you know,
slave.
yes,
And if you owned a slave, you got an additional amount. Yes.
yes, exactly. So, you know, I'm not advocating that we go back to that ideal, not at all. But I think that perhaps we could improve the voting pool that we have now. How would I do that if I were king? I would, for one, put everything in English only. In other words, if you don't want to bother to learn English, don't show up. I would, for example, limit the hours from 7 of one day, one election day, from 7 in the morning to 8 at night. That's it. And so I think that the idea is you need people who are motivated, who are innovative. And if you just let anybody vote, you're going to have a mess. You're going to have the mess we have now. And by the way, that can be done because we're not a democracy. Of course, we're a republic.
Well, a debate over whether a republic or a democracy will have to wait for another time.
I would love to have that.
But ever since we had the income tax and the central bank, the federal government has been calling the shots through intergovernmental transfers of monies.
That's right.
Okay, so what if we were to have standards? What do you recommend those standards be, and how are they enforced? So I had one as we were thinking earlier today. I was thinking about this. Is many people believe that people come in to take advantage of the welfare state, right? Or social services that are provided at all different levels. You know, that may or may not be true. Some of my studies show that immigrants participate at a larger rate in the labor force than do native-born Americans. So the point then is it's an economic wash, but I thought one thing might be that if you win the lottery and immigrate to the United States, you have to wait 4 years before you can get any social services. What do you think of that idea?
Well, I don't think that would last very long, not in this. I mean, you've got cities and states that are completely, that are doing their own thing. And California has just recently introduced, free healthcare for illegal aliens. And
that's why immigrants are getting bused to Texas, getting bused from Texas to the Grand Central Station bus terminal, because New York is what type of a city?
Sanctuary city.
Sanctuary.
It's like the U.S. Embassy. It's a sanctuary.
So I mean, and there was just recently, I think in San Francisco, they were allowing illegal aliens to vote in local school board elections. Now that was recently overturned. So I don't think the laws really mean anything right now when it comes to people crossing borders.
Yeah,
regarding what the laws are yet. So
regarding the participation, I think we mentioned that before. Yes, the participation on the labor force as a sole measure is, to me, not valid, because you have to say, you know what, even your friend Simon, I'm sorry, Simpson.
Julian Simon, who say that people are the ultimate resource.
Correct.
But open immigration,
Yes, but he also had a bunch of caveats that said private property, free markets, people who are smart enough to be innovative and take care of the scarcity and so forth. We don't have that. So his way of setting things up is in a world we don't have. So it doesn't apply anymore. What we have is, since 1965, we're importing people from just mainly Mexico and other poor countries. And so they come with a very low wage. So that doesn't apply. It doesn't work. And that's an issue that maybe we should discuss some more. And also the welfare situation. You have the Cato Institute saying, oh, immigrants don't have, yeah, that's federal. Federal, they don't. But local, as Gary mentioned, yeah, they do. A much, much higher rate than the native born. So we need to really, really think about this, I think.
How about voting? I mean, you know, right, voting was for obviously very sexist and racist. If only white men can vote. And it was that way until women were granted the right to vote, right? And even then, early on, maybe not in the United States, but it was sometimes, for example, only the oldest male was allowed to vote, or if you had an estate, were allowed to vote. So,
well, it was very restricted, and it was very restricted up until I think just after World War II. And I think women gained their right to vote in Britain, but also large numbers of men couldn't vote there, and that they also gained their right to vote then because they were barred from the property laws. You had to own a certain valued property in order to vote, and a lot of people didn't. So all of a sudden they gained their right to vote. So a lot of white males barred from voting were able then to vote. So I have nothing wrong with voting, just as long as.
Very interesting. I mean, to lay it out as simple as this: if you own property, then you're more likely to protect property. You're not going to enlarge the state. And so this gets back to, we just have 1 minute left. So anybody want to wrap up what we've learned? We've learned that the immigration system in the United States is broken because the rules are too complicated, laws are too complicated, and applied indiscriminately, or applied with discretionary power.
Well, I don't mind discretionary power, but when it's just blanket discretionary power I mean, Obama's DACA was really just a presidential fiat. I mean,
if there's no clear law, then it's all enforcement of the law is discretionary. We haven't got into the open borders and economic benefits and debate. So let's do that next time. Thank you, Marcy. Thank you, Gary. It's been good to see you, and thank you to our viewers. We'll see you next time on Hardfire TV.
Girl